Hi, what I'm going to teach today is the basics of Photoshop. The first time you open up the program, it can be a little bit intimidating. It looks like the instrument cluster of an airplane that you've never had a lesson on how to fly. And so what I'll be doing in this lesson is to teach you the tools and what they actually do. That way, when you go on to learn more about Photoshop, you can reference this and feel a lot more confident in what that tool actually does, especially if you look at other tutorials online. So let's get to the computer. Okay, so the very first thing we have to do is open up Photoshop. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Usually it opens up pretty quick, but sometimes it takes a little bit of time. And this is what we see. So don't get discouraged early on because of how many things that there are. I'm going to explain sort of the geography of Photoshop, so you know where to look or what sort of areas to find things. All right, so down here we have our recent files that we've opened. Here we have some tutorials that you can go to, and you can find more in Learn. We have two real options here though. We have Create New from scratch, or we can open a photo or a file. I'm going to go ahead and Create New. And then to get started, a lot of times it starts off with a web resolution. So what I usually click to is Print. And a standard size for a piece of paper is 8.5 inches by 11 inches. And so we can change its orientation. So now it's wider than it is tall, or we can keep it normal. We do want to name this, otherwise everything is going to be untitled 1, 2, 3 in our file system. So let's just call this Photoshop 101. All right, and I have the resolution set to 300. This is important to look at because if you don't have it at a high resolution, you can be editing on something, and then when you go to print it out, it might be pixelated. So the other standard is 72. So if you're making something for the web and the screen size is 8.5 by 11, 72 would be the normal one. 300 pixels per inch. And I have it set here to inches instead of pixels. And I have it on RGB color, 8-bit, background white, working RGB. These things you don't really need to change. So we're just going to change the width and height. I'm actually going to go for a square because I don't really know what photo we're going to work on first. All right, create. And now we have this blank square. So one of the first things we have is, this is the tool palette over here. And if I click on this, it gives us 2 rows. And this is sometimes easier to navigate, but it takes up a little more real estate on this left-hand side. So I need to put a photo in here. So I'm going to go File, and then I'm going to Place Embedded. And I'm looking for a photo. This one looks good. And then I go Place. And you'll notice that it resizes to the size of my artboard, and you can adjust the size of it by pulling the outsides in and out. Now in other other versions of Photoshop, you used to have to hold Shift on the edge of this. So if you want to adjust this in a different way, now it's the reverse. So I hold Shift and I can warp this. But for 99.9% of the time, I don't want to warp my photo. I want to keep it at the aspect ratio that it came in. So whichever one you have to do, either holding Shift or not holding Shift, just make sure that when you're resizing something, it is accurate to its normal pixels. And then after this is done, we can either push Enter, or you can see this check mark up here. I'll go ahead and click that. Now it's in place. And you can see it is a smart object because it has this little icon down here. And I'll swing my cursor so you can see a big cursor. And we have a blank background layer. And if I turn off the eyeball of the background layer, we can see a bunch of these little boxes, gray and white boxes. And what that means is that it is transparent. So anything beneath this, when this is turned off, will not show up. If I export it with this turned on, there will be a white background. All right, moving on. So the Move tool. While we are selecting this layer, we can move this object with the move tool. And inside this, we can actually transform it. So here we have this auto select layer, and then where it says show transform controls, if we click that, it will give us these little blocks on the outsides. And as we move our cursor, we get different types of cursor icons or arrows. This one looks like if I hold it, I get to rotate. And if you want to rotate evenly by 15 degrees, you can hold down Shift, and that will rotate by 15 degrees. If I want to expand out, remember the same thing applies, holding Shift. I'm not holding Shift because it's the newer version of Photoshop where they fixed that. And then same thing here. It will adjust all sides of this unless I hold Shift. And then I would be able to squash it. Command Z or Control Z on a PC will allow us to go back in time or to edit, undo. And that edit undo keeps going back 4 ways. Here's our history panel. So we opened up the Photoshop where we created a new document. We placed the embedded smart object. We changed the layer visibility a few times. That was that eyeball. And we moved it. So if we want to go back to this other thing, I guess I can't click that. But that's a way that we can get back to a certain step other than having to go edit undo. All right, so the move tool is pretty obvious. And the nice thing about Photoshop is it'll give you a little video preview of what this tool does, and it will give you the hotkey or the quick command key, which is V to get back to the move tool. Now, if I want to end my transform, I need to either push enter or I need to check this little check mark so that it stays in place. And I'm gonna turn off the show transform controls because I'm done transforming this object. Just so you know though, now I will be able to flip horizontal. So now it's in reverse of that. If I don't like it, Command Z, and I can get back to the original. Moving on, we have the elliptical marquee tool. And if you notice, there's a little tiny arrow down at the bottom right-hand corner of this tool. That means that there's more tools in that little set. So if I hold down on this, we can see we can get to the rectangular marquee tool. So I'm going to go ahead and use the rectangular marquee tool to make a selection. I'm going to select right here. And you see these marching ants. The marching ants are saying this is where your selection is. And you can actually take away from a selection or add to a selection. So I'm going to hold down Option or Alt, and you notice it shows up as a minus next to this. So if I take this and I make another box and I let go, it minused or subtracted from that selection. And if I hold down on Shift, you'll notice that it creates a little plus arrow. So I can add, whoops, I didn't hold down Shift. If I hold down Shift and make this selection, it's going to add to that selection. So that's how you can make interesting selections just by holding Shift or Alt or Option on a Mac. To deselect this object or to get rid of the marching ants, sometimes they are not in the space that you want them to be, you will just push Command D. So that's for deselect. And you'd find that up here. We can go reselect and then deselect. And that's where I find that quick command. As far as the elliptical marquee tool, it's pretty much the same, except if I hold Shift, it'll make a perfect circle. And you can imagine what a rectangle, if I hold Shift, would do. It would be, again, you have to start the, now this is about timing. So because I didn't hold Shift before I started the rectangle and I held it after, it's gonna make a square. If I hold it at the beginning, it's going to not make a square, but it's gonna make a plus to that. And I can let go of Shift and it'll still keep that. And I can push Shift again to make another square. So just so you know that that is sort of like a toggle, and the timing of when you do that changes the way it affects it. All right, I'm gonna push Command D to deselect, and we're gonna go to another selection tool. This is the lasso tool, and it is for quick selections that are freehand. So if I just wanna select this object just like that, maybe I wanna adjust it a little bit. I hold down on Option or Alt, and I can get it a little bit closer, like this. Get rid of this little selection. And that's a way that you can select things really roughly. This is not for precise selections. Underneath this, there are some more, because we can see that little arrow in the bottom. And if I hold down on it, I get to the polygonal lasso tool. And this lasso allows me to select objects that are pretty straight. So I don't want to try and click a million times to get this mountain, which is Mount Rainier, by the way. I would use this maybe if there was a box or an object that had some straight lines, and then I could adjust that selection there. And remember, when you're making a polygonal selection, you need to go to the end, and you'll notice if I get close right there, it creates the little circle next to the icon or the cursor, and that means that it's going to finish the shape. And so it locks that shape all together. If I just click out over here, it doesn't actually ever finish the shape, but I could push Return or Enter, and it would connect the last two. So hopefully this is all making sense so far. The last one is called the magnetic lasso tool. And this one is trying to, if I get it close enough, follow the contours of the highest contrast areas in the photo. So this is a little bit difficult, and it's not super accurate, but it's better than if you were trying to click with the just polygonal lasso tool, which wouldn't do much good. All right, we'll just quit that there. And sometimes you get to this point where you're like, I'm stuck. I don't know how to end it. Just push Enter, and that will end your selection, and Command D, because this tool isn't as useful. We'll go back to the lasso tool. Next, now this tool is very useful. This is called the Quick Selection tool. And underneath this, we have the Magic Wand tool. The Magic Wand is like an older version of the Quick Selection tool, and it's all Photoshop used to have a while ago. If we click on this, and we just click that with the Magic Wand, it's trying to find color areas to select. So if I just click up here, it clicks this low contrast area. If I hold down Shift, I can add to this selection, maybe get the whole sky. But it also gets up pieces that I don't really want. Command D. The Quick Selection tool, this one is really good. So I'm just going to drag it across the sky, and immediately it finds that shape. I might have to refine it. So to zoom in, when you're in any tool over here, all you need to do is hold down Z for zoom, and you click and zoom in, and then you let go of the mouse, and then you let go of Z, and it'll go back to your original tool. Oh, it looks like something's stuck. The little icon, it's probably because I'm recording. I'm gonna hold Option to get the negative or minus, and I'm gonna minus from this selection. And I'm gonna make my brush smaller, and how I make the selection tool smaller and bigger is by using the open and close bracket keys. And real quick, those keys look like, I'm gonna get to the type tool. Actually, first I'm gonna go back, deselect, get to the type tool, and show you what these are. This key, oh, that's a terrible font to showcase this. All right. This is the type tool, and this is where we can choose our font that we're going to use. And I'm just going to get back to Helvetica because it's going to be easier. Oh, here we go, Helvetica. And it's this one or this one. And you can find this next to the P key, just to the right of it. And if you go and you want the brush to be bigger, you click on this one. If you want it to be smaller, whoops, click on this left one. So that is that. Type always is going to create a new layer, and that's because this is vector based. All of this is raster based, and I'll get to that in later videos. So I'm gonna drag that to the trash over here on the layers palette, and we'll get back over to that quick selection tool. There we are. Oh, that's not quick selection. This one. And if you lose track of what the quick command for this is, it's W, and we can tell that because we are able to hover and then it gives this little video. Really handy. If I want to zoom back out to my original view, holding down Command and 0 will get me back to my original artboard size. The next tool that we have over here is the crop tool. This one's going to be useful for us because when we started out with our artboard, it was 11 inches by 11 inches, but our photograph doesn't take up all of that real estate. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this crop tool, and it gives me these edges where I can crop in different pieces of this. And there's also some easier ways to go about this. We can change the ratio. So we could say, I already know the ratio of this photo is 2 by 3. So if I go 2 and 3, it is showing as that was vertical 3 and that is horizontal 2. But if I click on these, it'll switch between those. So now I can just get this in the right spot, maybe crop in a little bit more, and it's going to keep that ratio as we go. There are some other easier ways to do this, and also just like the move tool and the transform, if we hover around, we can actually straighten up our photo. Now, when I notice these things up at the top that say delete cropped pixels, if I check this, once I crop this, that information on the outside is gone. If I deselect it, I'll show you what happens. So I'm going to say, yes, I want to crop that, but maybe I missed a little bit down here. There's this little white edge. I actually didn't get it quite right. So I go back into the crop tool, and I can actually crop out, and it kept those pixels in its memory. It's really nice way of handling this if you make mistakes while cropping, because maybe you crop one photo into a square, which is already a 1-to-1 preset, and then maybe you crop another one into a 8 by 10 or something like that. 4 by 5. Good for Instagram. All right. 4 by 5, and then we'll say yes. It didn't delete that edge, and we can see that if I go back into the crop tool. There it is. I could get back out to those other things. All right, you get the crop tool. Moving on. Underneath this, there's the perspective crop tool. Don't need to go into too much detail about that. You can find that out when you actually need it. Next, eyedropper tool. This one I don't usually use as the tool. I always use the quick command for it, which isn't even I. I gets you to this tool, but if I'm in the brush, that's typically when I need to use the eyedropper. So if I go to the brush, won't let me brush on this layer. I'm going to grab a new layer and make the brush a lot smaller. If I hold down on Option or Alt, I get to toggle to the eyedropper tool, so I can actually select that color. You notice that where I selected, now this top area, which is your foreground color, is now that blue, or that white, or that yellow, or that green. And so if I were to paint, it would be painting with that particular color. You can also double click on this foreground color, and you can change to any color you would like. So I can select from this violet, purpley area. And if I knew exactly what this was called, I could actually change down here. Can't remember what this is called. I'll put it in the description. Hex code, that's what it is. And so if I were to pick out Jenny's color, 8, 6, 7, 5, 309. This is the color that would pop up. It's pretty ugly. And if I just push enter right there, oops. No, it just likes FFF. 8, 6, 7, 5, 3, 0, 9. That's actually one too many characters, but we'll go with it. So I'll just click here. A number between, closest value inserted. That is not the closest value. All right, we'll get rid of the 8. There, ugly brown. All right, so now this is Jenny's color, and we can change this color anytime we want to just by clicking through here and getting those things. Beautiful painting. All right, if we don't like the layer, we always want to work non-destructively. That means that this layer that's up here is not painting exactly on this one below it. And so to preserve this, we could just throw it away and create a new layer, and then we could start painting again. Same thing, throw it away, create a new layer, and continue painting. All right, we're gonna move on to, let's go beyond the eyedropper tool, color sampler tool. Same thing as that fancy perspective crop tool. You'll know when you need it. I won't go into detail about that. Next, we have the healing brushes. So we have spot healing brush, patch tool, and content aware move tool. So I'll go quickly through these. I think I need a new picture for this though, because this one doesn't have a lot of things to get rid of. Ooh, found one though. All right, this little log or stick that's in the water here, I don't really like it, so I want to get rid of it. One way to do this, because it doesn't have, I won't be able to do this on this. I'm gonna have to rasterize this layer, basically changing it from a smart object back to a rastered layer. So I'm gonna right click on this and rasterize layer. Now I can use the spot healing brush tool, which quick command is J for all of these. So if you want to get those, push J. Now the spot healing brush tool, it takes the area around the circle or around the brush that you're working with, and it uses some algorithm to figure out how to blend that in. So I just click over there and immediately it gets rid of that thing. This works pretty good until you get over to an area where it has an edge. Because this is a Ripley, it doesn't really matter. But if it was on the edge of, let's say, this mountain, it might have a little more trouble figuring out where to put stuff. So it's sort of just guessing from things around it. I'm gonna go to Command Z on that. If we wanna get rid of this grass piece, we can't really just drive down the whole way, so we'd have to stop right there. And that would make somewhat sense, but with certain grass. But if we ended every single one there, it would look really odd. So what we want to do is maybe use some other tools to get these things done. I'm going to go Command Z to get back some of these things I want to get rid of. And we'll move on to the healing brush tool. This one is more precise because we get to say, where do we want to take this from? So I'm going to make the brush a little bit smaller. I'm going to hold Option or Alt, and it gets this little target. And so I'm going to target right here. And then if I go over here, you can see that it actually fades over the top of it with what I'm going to be taking from. So if I click on this, I get to paint away, and you can see that it followed the target up there and painted those things. So if I'm trying to paint away this object here, I could select right on the edge and say, I want the edge right there, and then I can click and go out from there. Notice that it added a little bit there because it hit this tip. Really easy to just select a different area with the target by holding Option or Alt. Click that target, and then you can paint right there. Now the difference between this tool and the clone stamp tool is really easy to understand. Clone stamp tool will take exact pixels. The healing brush will take a sort of a blended version of those pixels. So if I go to this healing brush, make it a little smaller, and I want to duplicate this grass frond. I could hold Option, click on this, and then you'll see over here, it's going to take the exact pixels from that side as I'm going through. So this can be useful at certain points, maybe in a portrait. Here, we'll open one up really quick. Place embedded, find picture of a dog, maybe, how about this, elk. Place this, push enter. Now right here, I can't do anything because I'm on a smart object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rasterize this one also. And now I can work with it. So I'm going to hold Option. And if I wanted to make a really creepy looking spider elk, I could paint multiple eyes, and now you'll have nightmares. But it's taking exact pixels from those things. And so when you are trying to select something, keep that in mind is clone stamp is exact pixels, healing brush is blended pixels. And so for example, let's do the healing brush on this eye and show you the difference. All right, if I select here and I paint over here, you notice it gets a little darker, a little lighter, because it's blending out away from that. So it's going to take some of the pixels, and the longer you paint, the more pixels it's going to take from. But for the most part, it doesn't. It does a lot smoother of a transition between its edge. All right, I'm going to delete this layer. We'll get back to this. Command 0, zoom back out to our original view, and then we have the patch tool. Patch tool can take larger areas and get rid of them. So for example, if I wanted to take this entire mountain and get rid of it, don't know if I'll be able to do it very successfully, but you'll get the point. So I'll take this, and this works just like the healing brush. So it's going to take a sampled bit, and so this edge of trees is going to try and blend. It's not going to take exact pixels. And it blended across the whole thing. So this is not a very good thing to do on an edge. What you want to do is use this for areas that are completely enclosed. So that little log down here, let's go back to where we were. Where we had that log. All right, there it is. Little stick. If I select around the whole thing, now it makes the marching ants, and it wants me to select where do you want to take this from. So I can actually move it and say, oh, I kind of like the texture right here. And then it's going to blend that in with what it was before, across the whole way. So another one that's good is over here on this edge. If I move it just slightly, but keep it on the edge, then it's going to blend right across it. Command D to deselect that, and that looks really nice. All right, moving on. Content Aware Move Tool. All right, we're going to need a different photo for this because there's not really a lot to Content Aware Move in this. So let's go File, Place Embedded. We'll find this woolly mammoth. Push Enter. All right, now I'm going to take this and rasterize it because otherwise it doesn't like to work with these blending tools. And so I'm going to grab this woolly mammoth, and you can make a better selection than this using different selection methods. But I'm just going to lasso it with this tool, and then I'm going to try and move it over here. I'll try this. Oh, I'm still on the patch tool. That's why it's not working. We'll go to this, and because I already made that selection, it's perfectly fine. I'm just going to move it over here, and then I have to push OK. And then it's going to use Content Aware to try and fill the pixels over here that I got rid of. And sometimes it does a pretty good job. If it was a clean background, it would have done a lot better. If I just moved it a little bit less, it might have worked even more. So I'm just going to move it just a little bit. Try that. Give it some time to think. And it still is struggling. So a lot of times if you can find the right objects to move, that's probably a better option for you. Or maybe I need to move this little piece of grass. So let's go Command D, zoom in, gonna grab, oh, how about this rock? This rock is completely in the wrong spot. It needs to be over here. Then we're gonna push OK. And it did a really good job with that rock because it was more isolated and was not in an area where a lot of other things were competing for it. So we'll try this one, move this up over here. We'll see if this works. And it did all right. Not terrible, not great. So anyway, that's what the Content Aware Move tool does. Next, back to the brush. Okay. B for brush, gets me back there. And then this is where we really need to pay attention to this top area of the brush. So I'm gonna just turn off this layer right here. I'm gonna work on layer 1 so you can see it. And first thing I'm gonna do is, over here are my presets for brushes. I don't have any yet, but in here there's a bunch of presets or types of brushes that you can get. So general brushes, the two main ones are soft round and hard round. And I'll just click soft round now. And what it does, I can change the size of the brush here, and I can change the hardness of the brush over here. So I'm gonna go ahead and paint with 100% opacity, 100% flow, smoothing set to 0, and we'll try this out. All right, so this is what the line looks like when I'm doing that. Now, if I turn the opacity down, and the cool thing about this is while we're in the brush tool, if I just push on any of the number keys, I can get to that particular tenth of opacity. So if I push 5, I get to 50% opacity, 2, 20%, 8, 80%. So let's try 50% and see what that looks like. So it's half as bright or opaque as this other line. If I bring the opacity up, but I change the flow, let's go way down so you can sort of see this happening. Let's go to 14%, 12%. If I click and drag, it looks like the opacity is low, but if I keep drawing back and forth, it starts to build up that opacity. Over here, when we had our opacity set to 50%, 5, even if I go back and forth, it still will not add up in that opacity. All right, the next thing that we have, and 0 would be 100% opacity. Next thing we have is smoothing. So if you noticed, I was trying to create a smooth wave over here, but if I increase the smoothing, now what happens is it gives me this sort of line that helps me draw a much smoother. I go a lot slower, so I'm way ahead of it, but it helps me draw a smoother line. We'll bring the smoothing even more. Let's go to that. All right, so now I'm gonna be able to make really smooth lines, or maybe not. I'm using the mouse. I also have the tablet. What am I doing? Trackpad is no good. Tablet is good. All right, so this is how I can make a nice smooth line. And here's how I can select everything. That's another selection method. Select everything on this layer. Command A, just like you would on a Word document. And then I can just push delete. And it deletes everything on that layer. It keeps the marching ants there until we deselect. But now I have a nice clear thing there. Smoothing I'm going to bring back down because I don't really want. Keep it a little bit up. And I usually like to paint with my flow down more than I like to paint with my opacity down, because I know that it can eventually get to the full opacity. All right, Command-Z. Moving on, we've got the history brush tool. I would avoid using this. There's better ways and non-destructive ways to be editing, and this inherently means that you're editing in a destructive way. So I would rather use layer masks and different layers to get the same effect. So avoid this tool if you can. Same thing with the eraser. That seems like if you are going to edit with your brush here and then try to get rid of some of it with the eraser tool. I'll bring the opacity up. Get rid of it with the eraser tool. It's a very destructive way of doing that. A better method would be to use a layer mask, and I'll explain layer mask in a different video. All right, next we have the gradient tool. So I get rid of this layer, make a new one, Command-0, zoom out. And the gradient tool, if I make a selection right here, is pretty great because I can select which gradient I want to go in there. There's a whole bunch of these canned ones, or we can make our own. So let's make our own by double-clicking in there. And we can select the leftmost color, or the darkest color, by double-clicking here. And let's pick a green. And then on this right one, we double-click, and we get, and we'll pick a bright yellow. And then in between, we'll double-click, and we'll pick a bluish color. And now, if I click OK, and I click and drag a line, right now it's a radial gradient. So the center is this rightmost part. Well, it should be the other way around, but we have reverse clicked here, and dither, and transparency. So this next time that I'm going to do it, I'm going to click right here and pull out, and you can see that it's reversed. It's this leftmost, then the middle, then the right as I click through. Here's the other types. We have the linear gradient. So it just goes in a line. We have the, what is this one called? Angle gradient? Yeah, angle gradient. Goes in a angle or off an angle that you've set. This one is the, I think it's called the radial one. No, not radial. What is it? Reflected gradient. And then we have the star gradient. And this one looks like this. All right. Most of the time we're just going to use these two. It's the radial and the, what did I call this one? Linear. Linear one. Nice. Okay, so that's the gradient tool. Next we have the smudge tool. All right, we'll go ahead and smudge parts of this. I have a brush that's sort of speckly right there because I like to have it look like a sponge. But you can also pick the regular brush, soft round brush, and I'll show you what this does. So if I click on this, this is like my finger pushing the colors back and forth. So I can slide this color up this way, or I can slide this color back this way. And this can be useful for different tutorials that you're following, or you can actually edit your layer mask with this smudge tool. So if you have an edge and you're like, I want to mush that in a little bit, you can do that. Next, we have the sharpen tool. I would avoid using the sharpen tool just because if you want to sharpen parts of your image, it's probably better to sharpen the entire image rather than just little pieces of this. But this can fix some areas, but if you go too far, notice what happens. It gets a little bit too grainy or noisy. And what this is caused by is sharpening refers to back when painters used to paint. They would add a little bit of lightness and a little bit of darkness to a contour, and that would create more of a line or an edge to it. And so that was called sharpening. And that's basically what's happening here. The next one we have is the dodge tool. And underneath this, there is the burn tool and the smudge tool. We'll just start with the smudge tool. And smudge takes away some saturation. So if I keep clicking on this, eventually it'll get black and white in that certain area. And you can change the mode, you can saturate or desaturate. And how much flow is how fast it's gonna do it. Next, we've got the burn tool, and these refer to old darkroom tools that you would use to lighten and darken selective areas of a photo. So I'm gonna go ahead and get back to the photo. Get rid of that. Command D, deselect. And right now I'm on the dodge tool. So this is going to selectively lighten areas of the photo. So I'm gonna click over here and click over here and click over here. What happens if I keep pushing it is it enhances the saturation, and I don't like that. So there is much better ways to dodge and burn than using these actual tools. But if you look at another video that I'll make that has to do exactly with the selection methods, we can actually use this to enhance our layer mask. But be careful if you're using these dodge and burn tools. They are, what do we call that? Destructive. We want to always be editing in a non-destructive way. And so if we did want to dodge and burn, this is a really quick way to do it. Grab a curves layer, adjustment layer, which I'll go over in another video, pull up the middle of it. Now invert this layer mask by going Command I, and then if you just painted with the regular brush, you could paint and you could lighten certain areas of the photograph. And it would not increase the saturation as you went. So that's really nice. Anyway, I'll go into that in more detail in a dodge and burn video. Next, burn exactly the opposite. Make the brush a little smaller. Whoops. Go back to this tool. And by clicking it, it darkens, but it also increases the saturation as well. So we want to avoid using these tools on a photo, or especially directly on a photo, because we're going to have to go Command Z to get back to where we were. All right, that's far enough. Command D. Next, we already went over the type tool, but there is a vertical type tool underneath this. So if you want to type straight up and down, you can do that. Next, we have the pen tool. And if you are familiar with Adobe Illustrator, this is going to come in handy for making selections. But we have pen tool, freeform pen tool, curvature pen tool, add anchor point tool, delete anchor point tool, and convert point tool. A lot of these are available inside the pen tool. So if I click on this and I'm making this path, but I hold down Option or I hold down Command, I might be able to, or hover over these things, I might be able to actually adjust them. Yeah, while I'm going. So anyway, pen tool takes a bit of time to get good at, but once you are good at it, you can make selections of cars and houses and things like that that have really nice lines, especially products. And then you can go over here to paths and you can make a selection of that, marching ants, or you could fill those pixels or anything. So I'm gonna go back to layers, Command D. And this is direct selection tool. This has to do with those vectors. So after we make a vector and we want to adjust some of these things, we have two selection tools. We have direct selection tool and path selection tool. Path selection is basically just a big move tool. It can't select these little anchor points. But if we click on direct selection tool, we can click, oops, gotta click out of it. There we go. And I can adjust these anchor points and these handles after I've already created that path. And lastly, we have the zoom tool. It's not actually last because there's a lot more than this hidden. But zoom tool, if we want to select that, we can click and drag and we can zoom in and out. But remember, all these tools except for one tool, I wonder if you can guess which one, we can actually just hold down Z and get to this zoom tool. Paths, I gotta deselect this path. There we go. And just to answer that, this is the only tool that we can't hold down Z because that's what's going to happen. So it does not do anything, obviously, in the type tool because, yeah, it would just type those letters instead of use the quick command. All right, go back to this. Now, I said there was a lot more tools. Down here, we have Edit Toolbar, and we can see single column marquee tools, single row marquee tool, and so on and so on and so on and so on and so on. You can customize your tool palette to have the things that are most useful to you. Hand tool, I definitely put in a hidden spot down here because you never actually use it. I'll show you when you would use the hand tool. So you zoomed in, and then you'd want to use the hand tool to move around. I'm just scrolling with my mouse right now. But if I hold spacebar, I always get to the hand tool when I'm zoomed in. So I can move around even if I'm in the brush. I paint right here, but I want to move over here. I just hold down spacebar and I get to move around there. And that's probably enough for one day. That's more than enough for one day. But the things that you can remember are these tools all will sort of tell you what they do if you hover over them. This layers palette is really useful for you, and I'll go over in more detail what these other things are down here. And every tool seems to have options up here that you need to pay attention to and see what they actually do. This one's fun. Vertical symmetry line, and then I'm going to grab the brush and I'm going to draw over here a butterfly. And notice that it goes, this is just extra content. Smiley face. And that's about everything for the very basics of the Photoshop tools. Hopefully you learned a few things, and next time you open up Photoshop, you have a little more confidence in what those things actually do. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. And if you want to learn more about photography and digital arts, be sure to subscribe to the channel. And if you have any suggestions for future videos, be sure to leave those in the comments so I know what you want. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.